So I just did a Titanfall 2 video, and I was talking about how it looks great, but this is going to be my Titanfall impressions of the game. And I think I'm going to start out by saying the gameplay again was great. It was fantastic. It introduced a lot of elements that we hadn't seen before. It introduced pilots. It introduced jetpacks, which Call of Duty just copied, and they didn't get it right at all. But it introduced the mobility of the pilots, the mobility of the jetpacks. It also introduced Titans to the fold. It introduced all of these semi-cool weapons for both to combat each other. The pilots to combat the Titans to combat the pilots, and the Titan v Titan or Pilot v Pilot matchups, which were pretty good as well. It was a pretty overall the gameplay was fantastic. It was great, right? Again, what I said in Titanfall 2, no variation whatsoever. As great as the gameplay was, there was no real substance there. There was just like, all right, kill shit over and over and over and over and over again. There was no variation in the modes. The Titans, there were only 3, like I said in my last video. There were also not a lot of weapons, not a lot of good weapons, I would say, for Titans. And the pilots, they had very generic weapons, which, again, in my last video, I said that I don't really care about the pilots. I more along the lines care about how the Titans function and work in the game, because, again, it's like the Titans are the most important thing in the game. The game is called Titanfall, but the pilots, yeah, they're a really good element, but it's not great. It's not as great as the Titans. But again, Titans are the main core of the game. They should really be focusing on that. The maps, I will say, were built pretty well. You had maps that were sometimes built for Titans, where buildings would be spread out super far. So as a pilot on the ground, you couldn't really jump around as much as you could, and you had to be a lot more tactical about when you were going to fight Titans, when you were going to be out in the open, because you were super vulnerable if you were in the open. But then again, some of these maps, they also had places where pilots could very well excel in these very tight neighborhoods and alleyways, where pilots could jump in between buildings like monkeys in the African jungle or something like that. And it was great for pilots because you had all of this mobility regained, but it's like you really couldn't venture outside of these parts, and Titans would have to usually go into these alleyways to try and track down the pilots, right? So, I mean, the maps were, you had maps built for Titans, but you also had advantages for pilots in certain scenarios. You also had maps where pilots excelled very well. Like there was that map that was shown at E3 that really showed how pilots could play in this game. They had them jumping through neighborhoods, they had them jumping over rooftops, etc., etc. And the actual gameplay looked fantastic because it showed something new at E3, and that map was probably one of the better maps designed for pilots. There were some that were better and some that were worse, but it was like that map was definitely like a map that's a great example of the pilot combat. But I think that Titanfall really did suffer from not necessarily having a story, but really kind of having this half-assed version of the story. Like, I didn't really care about the story whatsoever, and I'm a little bit worried about Titanfall 2 if they really just took resources from the multiplayer, then put it in the single player, and it's not, and now the single player isn't as bad, which in Titanfall there was none, but it's definitely not up to par as the multiplayer, and the multiplayer is now suffering because the single player took resources from the multiplayer. But hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully it's still going to be very good and very challenging to screw up. Hopefully they'll be able to actually have some variation in the game. Like if they had 8 or 9 Titans with 10 to 12 really good guns, not the shitty guns that they implemented in the game, but like really good guns, it would be completely different, I would be talking about something completely different. I would be like, yeah, Titanfall was really great. Titanfall really showed its stuff. Titanfall was really a game that had longevity in the fights, because fighting in the game isn't really the problem. It was how you were fighting. You were fighting with the same toys over and over and over again, and that just made the game boring, right? So that's just my impressions of Titanfall. Remember to like, comment, favorite, and subscribe, and so that way I can know what you guys are thinking. So that way you can also be a part of the conversation as well. And for the one person that's watching, and the multitudes of other people that will be watching, I hope to see you again. Have a fantastic day.